Constitutional Conversations is a series of discussions by America's leading scholars about the principles framing, ratification, and implementation of constitutional government in the United States. This series is hosted by the James Madison Memorial Fellowship Foundation, an agency of the federal government established by Congress to improve teaching about the United States Constitution.
Well, the creation of the Democratic/Republican Party, or the democracy as it's sometimes called, and you noted that the names change a lot, that has proved to be a very durable party because our current president, President Biden, is the direct descendant of Thomas Jefferson and James Madison's new party. On the other hand, the other party at the time, the Federalist Party, it has changed and transmogrified itself, but its basic organizing principle of a stronger central government, that has remained, and one might almost say that it now is incarnated in the modern Democratic Party. And but you have also pointed out this tendency of Americans to be a two-party system. Do you think that this cast of characters that you talk about so well, did they anticipate that we would be sort of a permanent two-party nation?
At the beginning of my story, the answer to that question is no. They didn't anticipate that parties would be a permanent aspect of American politics. Again, coalitions on particular issues, a coalition for ratifying the Constitution, yeah, okay. But then the Constitution is ratified, and now we go on to other issues. So the notion that there would be this thing called the Democratic Party, our modern Democratic Party, that would trace its roots to the 1790s and Thomas Jefferson, that would have surprised them. I think if they had thought about factions, they would have thought a little bit more like the Federalists, Whigs, Republicans, in that the Federalists, they had a certain set of issues, but those issues were resolved, and then the War of 1812 came along, and the Federalists, they sort of fell apart. And it took a while for remnants of the Federalists and factions spinning off from the Republican Party to become the Whigs. And then the Whigs fell apart, and then the modern Republicans. Although it's interesting to note that the two parties we have today, the ones we call the Republican and the Democratic Party, okay, well, even the Republican Party is not that far away from being 2 centuries old. So it goes back to the 1850s. So, but the striking thing, and this would sort of bear out a little bit of the notion of the importance of parties, in that the political parties that we know today, they've been operating under those labels since the 1850s, when the Republicans adopted. So we've had these two parties, two major parties, and occasional challenging third parties that never really got anywhere. But they have swapped positions so that the Republican Party of the 1850s and 1860s was the party of bigger government, and the Democratic Party was the party of smaller government. And so they flipped on that. But one of the things, and this demonstrates the durability of party as party, in that these institutions managed to adjust to changing times. They absorbed new political ideas. So the Democrats largely adopted the populist agenda during the 1890s and made that part of their own. The Republicans and the Democrats have switched positions on foreign policy and various issues, but they always managed to call themselves these parties. And they have shifted their geographical bases. So for 100 years after the Civil War, the Democratic Party was the party of the South, and the South was the region of the Democratic Party. Well, that shifts dramatically beginning in the late 1960s and continuing until the 1990s, by which time the South had become solidly Republican. So it's like a company that is operating under the same name, the management changes, and the things that they're selling change, but the party still persists. And that part, I think, really would have surprised the people that I write about, because it's something that exists really, it's entirely extra-constitutional. It's a matter of...
Which is not to say unconstitutional.
Precisely. It's not unconstitutional.
It's not in there.
Right. But we could, if the political parties went out of existence today, Congress would grind to a halt. We would not know how to hold elections. We would not know how to recruit candidates. We wouldn't know where we were. And so we pay great and understandable honor to the Constitution. It provides the guidelines for how our political system has evolved. Almost nobody gives comparable honor or respect to political parties. But we wouldn't have the Constitution today, and it certainly wouldn't operate the way it does today, without the political parties. So the Constitution is, I suggested earlier, just an outline. It's a sketch of basic principles. Now, how do you put that into action? And it's hard to see from this distance how it could have operated without political parties or something very much like them. And it could have, conceivably, it could have been just sort of unspoken assumptions. You wouldn't necessarily have to have paid party staff, but, well, people got to make a living. So it's quite possible that the very, I'll call it vagueness of the Constitution, made parties inevitable. If the Constitution had been more detailed, conceivably, parties wouldn't have emerged in the way they did. For example, we have this institution of the Speaker of the House of Representatives. There's nothing in the Constitution that says you're going to have this person doing this thing, but somebody, if they had stepped back and they had observed Parliament, somebody has to say, your turn to speak, now we vote. And so they could have written that into the Constitution. Now, they were smart enough not to, because they didn't know how this was going to evolve, but they did leave a lot of room for creative interpretation. And of course, this whole question of interpreting the Constitution has been a big part of the story ever since, as we are discovering in this final week of this term of the Supreme Court.
Constitutional Conversations is made possible by a generous grant from the Fairleigh S. Dickinson Jr. Foundation. Constitutional Conversations is made possible by the James Madison Education Fund.